Hey guys, I'm Jacob Valier, and I'm going to be giving my speech today on whether or not college athletes should be paid or not. I'm going to argue that they should. This is my audience.
Hi.
Hello, here at my house. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Great. All right, so here we go. You can start the timer. Amanda, please. So before I dive into this about whether or not college athletes should be paid, I wanted to start by asking a question of, just rhetorical. Do you enjoy making money for the things that you do? This would be a pretty easy question. And secondly, does that bring a sense of pride to your work, making money for what you do? I have a job myself, and I get paid for what I do, and I appreciate that. I take pride in that because it's something that I do. I work for a company, and they pay me. I provide a service to a company, and they pay me. Pretty simple. I think every major thing does that, except the difference is when we're talking about the NCAA that seems to be performing, have athletes performing an action for a certain company, it's all just sort of, that logic just goes out the window. You don't pay them even though they're providing a service for you. So there's a lot of reasons why I believe college athletes should be paid, but I'm only going to hit on 4 points today. My first point will be that the student college athletes should be paid because it would help their families financially as well as themselves, and it would add a degree of parity to college sports, and it also brings in a ton of revenue for the NCAA, and they should be getting some compensation for that. And finally, the amateurism debate is not necessarily a logical argument in this speech. So my first point is that the paying of the athletes, the college athletes, would help the families out as well as themselves financially. I just wanted to pull out a stat that I found. 86% of college athletes live below the poverty line, right? And the average out-of-pocket expenses for each full scholarship athlete was approximately $3,200 per year, starting with the 2010 to 11 school year. And Duke basketball players were valued at over $1.02 million, and Texas football players were valued at almost $514,000 in a recent poll. So I don't know if you know anything about college athletes' schedules, but they practice, they work out, they train all throughout the season, and then towards the weekend, if they have a road game, they have to go to the road game, wherever that is, and then come back, and they have no time to study, no time to have a social life, and more importantly, they have no time to necessarily have any type of income coming in because they don't have a job. So the fact that they are valued so much, Duke basketball players and the most prominent basketball schools and all of the NCAA are valuing their players at around $1 million. Prominent football schools around $500,000. And, just the fact that so many of them live under the poverty line and aren't able to provide for their own families is just further proof of why they should be paid. Only 14% of college athletes live above the poverty line, and the other 86 don't have the opportunity to go get a job to provide for their families who live in poverty and don't have an opportunity to make a name for themselves outside of the sport that they play basically for free. So the fact that there are so many poor families that are related to college athletes and there's no way for them to provide for them is just further proof that they should be paid, because not only would it help them financially, but it would help their families significantly financially. My second point is that they should be paid because it would add a degree of parity to college sports. Now, what do I mean by parity? Parity is how competitive something is. Now, if you've ever watched college sports, especially college football, you know that Alabama, Clemson, and LSU are like the big powerhouses. Ohio State, all those schools are like the big powerhouses, the most prominent schools. And there are just some lopsided scores. Like if Alabama were to play a school like Liberty, for instance, the final score would probably be something along the lines of 62-0. And, those scores happen way more often than you think in college football and college basketball. And it makes it kind of boring to watch when Clemson's playing this AAA team and there's just no competitive factor, so there's no incentive to watch. And you know, there wouldn't be as much of a stranglehold on these lower level programs if you all paid them equally. If the NCAA paid their athletes equally, then there would be more incentive to go play for a school like Liberty, to go play for a school like, I don't know, NC State or George Mason up in Fairfax. There'd be more incentive to go play at those schools because they offer the same amount of payment. It would be paid based on the sport you play and not the school you go to. If you play football, you're probably going to get paid more than the soccer team does because football brings in more revenue to the NCAA than soccer or tennis do. So players would have more of a leniency to go to a school like Liberty because of just the fact that there's an equal amount, and then that would result in more parity because the better players would go to the lesser schools because there's no other incentive to go anywhere else. The third point is that college athletes should be paid because it brings an overwhelming amount of profit to the NCAA, whom they play under. Back in 2010, the NCAA agreed to a 14-year, $10.8 billion contract with CBS. And what's funny is that the NCAA, the schools, everybody profits off of that except for the players. Players make $0.00 of that $10.8 billion. And as I alluded to in the second point, the NCAA should pay the athletes and not the schools themselves because the schools might as well just raise tuition at that point. The NCAA would pay them because they've got all this money from TV deals. They've got all this money from merchandise. They've got money from ticket sales. Everything that goes into a college experience, whether it's football or basketball or any sport, benefits the NCAA and just does not benefit the athletes who are out there putting their lives and their health on the line. So it isn't any easier to balance school with anything like football or basketball. They're all huge time commitments. All athletes don't have time to go get jobs and provide for themselves or anybody like that. And so for that reason, the NCAA making all that money should reciprocate some back to the players. And finally, the logic that amateurism should not be a reason to say that they should be paid. The real reason the NCAA wants to keep college athletes on amateurism status is for their own self-interest. Preventing collegiate athletes from earning a professional status means more money for the players and less money for them. And that goes back sort of to point number 3, is that overall they just don't want the athletes stealing the glory from the NCAA. That's the brand. There are about 10 competitive games per year. The NCAA needs to focus on how to make that better. That goes back to the parity point. It's in their own selfish interest to keep making a profit off of these players who are basically, if you really think about it, being treated like volunteers, willing volunteers, or even slaves, but that's another time for another thing. So to conclude, to summarize, there are a lot of reasons to believe that college athletes should be paid. They should be paid because their families benefit financially. It would bring parity to college sports. They would bring an overwhelming amount of profit to the NCAA, and it has nothing to do with amateurism. So as you sit and think about the points that you heard me make, think about it from a college athlete's perspective. Is any of this really fair? I ask you to consider changing your mind on this subject. Thank you very much. I'm Jacob Valier.